Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Anywhere Uni live podcast. This is actually our last episode for the 2024-2025 season and academic year. If you're listening to us through YouTube or through a platform like Spotify or Deezer, feel free to sign up and to register for the Anywhere Uni channel, so you're not going to miss any future podcast that we're going to launch, and we're going to start again in September with the new season in 2025, in September 2025. So tonight I'm delighted to be with the University of Oxford and with James, the head of international recruitment for undergraduate admission at the University of Oxford. Hi, James. How are you doing?
Hi, Owen. Very well, thanks. Very well. How are you?
Good. I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. It's been not so easy to find a suitable time because you are very busy on your end, and so I'm delighted that we can do this. And it's actually our last podcast of the school year, so this is perfect to conclude the academic year.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be finally joining. As you say, it wasn't the easiest, but we got there, didn't we?
In this discussion, we usually start with kind of discovering the university as an institution and what it's about, what it means to study in this specific university, and then we move on talking about admission and how it works to apply to the university. So could you, even if everyone, you're lucky to be in an institution that everyone knows at least by name, people don't necessarily realize what it means and what Oxford is. So could you briefly describe for us what the University of Oxford is as an institution?
So University of Oxford, the oldest university in the United Kingdom. I think we have our roots way back in the sort of 10th century. And we actually welcomed our first student way back in 1190, the first international student back in 1190. So we have a very lots and lots of experience of welcoming international students to our university. We're renowned for the world leading research of our academics, of our students, and for the quality of our teaching and learning environment. We'll go on to talk about a little bit more about that in more detail, I'm sure. But obviously, key to this is the approach that we have to teaching and learning in tutorials, very small group sizes per academic, so one or two students per academic. We can talk a little bit more about this, but that's a really key part of what we offer and the type of academic environment that we have here at Oxford.
At Oxford, you can apply directly. So we work a lot with French-bac students, IB students, American high school diploma students. So you can apply directly after graduating from high school, and it's a 3-year bachelor degree.
So in terms of the degrees we offer, it does depend on the subject. Our sciences tend to be 4-year degrees, which is incorporates a year of master's study as well. So students graduate from science degrees with a master's level qualification as well. But the rest of our degrees are 3 years, and indeed students apply directly from school. They tend to apply in their last year of high school, apply through the UCAS system like every UK institution. To commence their studies once they've finished their high school qualification. And indeed, as you allude to, we have many students who apply with French Baccalaureate, with the International Baccalaureate, advanced placements, many different international qualifications. So we do accept many from around the world. It's not just the British system of A-levels.
We're not going to ask you to list all the undergraduate programs that you offer.
Please don't.
But could you give us maybe some maybe obvious programs that you don't offer, and that sometimes you have too many students that maybe ask you, I want to go to Oxford, and list a program that you don't offer, or very unique programs that maybe you are one of the rare institutions to offer?
Yes, absolutely. So just to give a bit of an understanding of the overall picture for our courses, we offer around 50 different undergraduate degree courses, spanning many disciplines. So we offer degrees from things such as archaeology and anthropology, through the sciences, biology, biomedical sciences, chemistry, etc., to the sort of humanities areas, so the history, the English language, modern languages. And of course, we have our mathematics division as well. So mathematics figures quite highly also here at Oxford. Lots of combination degrees as well. So students can take, for example, history and politics. A popular course that we offer is politics, philosophy, politics, and economics. It's a very popular degree, one of our most popular. But many subjects that we offer can be studied in conjunction with another. An interesting one, for example, with maths and philosophy, economics and management. And some degrees that perhaps, students may be not so familiar with title-wise. We offer a degree called materials science, which is a degree that really is absolutely fascinating degree, looking at sort of things from engineering. So those interested in engineering can be really interested in that. Other things that we offer also are, I think it's probably easier in some ways, as you suggested, things that we don't offer. We don't offer dentistry. Uh, but we offer a huge array of languages, both modern and ancient. So some really, really interesting sort of topics to get your teeth stuck into. And what I would say, Orban, is that it's really, really helpful for students to really thoroughly interrogate the full range of courses that we offer, because very often students might choose a headline course or course that Oxford is very associated with. I mentioned PPE, but of course that does tend to attract really rather large amounts of students, when it could be the case that a student is much more suited to alternative degrees that we offer. Perhaps it might be better for them to study, or more aligned with their interests, to study history and politics, or classics, or all these other sorts of degrees that perhaps title-wise might not be familiar with, but maybe areas, topics they might already have an interest in, might like to develop their interests in a more specific way. So I always think it's really important for students to be open-minded when they look through and make a course choice, because it's a very important decision. It's one of the most important decisions you'll make, actually, when you go to university, what you study.
I mean, you're definitely preaching to the choir here. But so, sometimes we have a hard time passing that message through, because in some countries, if you don't study, if you don't go to a business school or do engineering or medicine, the perspectives, if you want to study anthropology or history or archaeology, can be limited in some countries. In the UK, could you give us a little bit of an overview of students that would say, okay, I have that passion for this subject that maybe seems a bit less of a subject that would get you a job. How does it work for these students when they study these courses afterwards?
No, it's a really valid point. And, especially for international students, we're talking about large investments of time, of money, to make that sort of transition to international education. And so it is important that students feel that it sets them up well for the future. What I would say to you, Urban, is that it's very much a case that, of course, we offer such an array of disciplines, but an Oxford education, the skills that students derive from studying with us in that quite intensive academic environment that I touched upon earlier in terms of the tutorials, really are skills that are highly prized across many different sectors that can be applied to many different areas. Look, obviously, if you want to become a doctor, you have to study medicine. There's no two ways about it. But equally, we have philosophy graduates who go and work in politics. We have anthropology graduates who go and work in finance. And that's how things obviously operate, certainly in terms of the UK working environment. But equally, a large part of this is because, of course, the array of skills and the level in which students are working at Oxford, regardless of what they're studying, sets them up tremendously. It provides an incredibly strong foundation for working really at the very highest levels in a wide variety of different industries and sectors. And I think it's really useful for students to do the research into this. It's actually, I think, incredibly important. As I mentioned, this is a big investment that students will be making. And you must look at career outcomes. You must interrogate that. Obviously, university websites have this, we have this, but equally, obviously, LinkedIn can be incredibly useful. And you might be surprised to see the degrees that our graduates, our alumni have studied and where they may be working now. They don't necessarily correlate. And one thing I would also add here, Urban, is that our degrees that are very popular with international students, I'm talking law, philosophy, politics, and economics, medicine, they're hugely oversubscribed. They're tremendously competitive to get into because, it's not the case that all 50 of our degrees have very high volumes of applications. And I'll give you a statistic here. 70% of our international applicants apply for just 10 of our courses.
Wow. Okay.
So, it really pays for students, not just certainly from the perspective of what actually will truly interest them and make them feel passionate on a daily basis, because that is important, but also actually there's practical matters. Okay, might this other slightly different degree actually also give me a better opportunity to secure a place at Oxford as well? So there is a practical side of things too.
So, sometimes students, when we look at these kind of things, they can be reassured because they are between the BSc and the BA. Oh, this is a BSc, Bachelor of Science. It means there's enough quantitative content in that course. So even if it's not directly a science degree, that's going to open doors maybe to pursue economics, finance afterwards. Could you clarify how it works in Oxford? Because I know some programs indicate BA, and I think it's a more tradition thing. So how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things at Oxford, it's steeped in tradition. In terms of outcomes, it doesn't necessarily correlate in terms of the kind of opportunities that will be available to you. I think different universities in the UK have different conventions essentially around that. So it's something which I do appreciate. Perhaps in home countries, a student's home country, there might be a certain stigma or a certain expectation that a student may graduate in a Bachelor of Science if they've studied a quantitative program. But, if I look at for example, our maths and computer science degree, students, it's interesting because if they do the 3-year course, that's a BA, so a Bachelor of Arts. But if they do the 4 years, is actually what they graduate with is a master's. Is a master's in computer science, and it's kind of has a slightly different sort of emphasis. So I wouldn't get too hung up on this if I were you, to be honest with you. It's not necessarily a reflection of a type of content that might be within that degree, as opposed to a degree elsewhere. It wouldn't, a computer science degree is quite far removed from an arts degree in the classical sense of the word. So it's more really just a convention that just goes back in centuries here at Oxford. And I think, an element of this is about also, students educating their own parents about this perhaps, and just obviously talking a little bit and learning a bit more and sharing that in relation to what that means. But content-wise, I think it's absolutely the case that students must look at the academic content of all the courses they're considering to study. That's hugely important, absolutely crucial. And here at Oxford, we're very transparent about what that is.
Could you dive a bit into the tutorial system, and that makes Oxford so unique? And I mean, Oxford and Cambridge are quite similar in those aspects. So what can students expect in terms of the academic experience when they join Oxford?
We are similar in that regard. They have a different naming convention for it. We call them tutorials. I believe they call them supervisions over in Cambridge. So the principle is absolutely the same. So it's every week. So it's tied in a little bit with the college system, which we can perhaps talk a little bit about later on as well. The tutorials are weekly, very small classes where students will take it within their college, because every student is assigned a college. And I'm sat in a college right now. Actually, I'm sat in Lady Margaret Hall, which is one of the 30 colleges we have. And students live here. They live here in the college, in accommodation. They will go to their tutorials here. Many of their tutors are based in this college too. So every student is assigned a college. Now the tutorials are very small group teaching environments. It can be 2 or 3 students per academic, and they are intensive, wonderfully challenging, academically invigorating environments for students to really go deeply into a particular subject. Now, I think it's the case, really, that it's one of the fantastic things about being a student here. The depth in which students can interrogate their subjects, the depth in which they will obviously be learning alongside an absolute specialist in their field, and working intensely, closely with them is a wonderful experience. It's also something which, an environment where students, it's not like in a seminar, or where you can kind of maybe not get too involved, and not, if you're not a bit confident about the subject, you can probably you can get away with not saying very much. In a tutorial, there's nowhere to hide. You will have to prepare. You do have to prepare. And indeed, in some cases, it's quite prescribed in terms of what reading you'll have to do and how you respond to that. But really wonderfully holistic, if you like, academic experience, and really unlike vast majority of other institutions around the world. And it's really cuts to the heart of what Oxford offers, and it's been the case for centuries and centuries. This is how we have taught, and this is how our students have learned.
If we go a bit deeper into the college system, the course, when students apply to a specific course, that course is going to be offered in multiple colleges, maybe not all colleges, but it's the same course, right? The teachers are going to be, the professors are going to be different. Or can they, does it change anything to study a specific course in one college or another?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so essentially the courses themselves are designed by departments. Okay, so departments run the courses. Now, academic departments span all colleges. They go across the whole of the institution. And in terms of lectures, this is where the departments run the lectures, and they are centralized, and you'll be a student as alongside students from all different colleges in that lecture environment, and the same with seminars. The tutorials are the things that take place within the college. And because academics are also assigned to colleges, what you will have, of course, is variation in terms of the way in which an academic will approach a certain subject. So there will be an element of variation, but the core content of the course remains the same, because all students sit the same examinations, either at the end of the academic year or at the end of the end of the actual degree itself as well. So there'll be slight differences, because every tutor will, obviously, they're unique. They will have their own approaches. They'll have their own research interests as well. And of course, they'll have their own take on a particular subject. But ultimately, the course itself, the core course, is the same, and examinations remain the same. So, yes, marginal variations. But again, ultimately end up with the same degree and the same examinations.
This is something, of course, that's often a bit confusing especially for international students that maybe are not used to university being split in different colleges, even if we can find that in other universities. What would you say? How could they approach this? Should they just apply open? Do they have to look at specific things?
Yes, I mean, you can approach it in different ways. Look, I mean, the college system is a wonderful system. Every single student, regardless of the college they're in, they always feel a great affinity to that college. They always love where they are. And I've not yet met a student who has sort of anything negative to say about their own college. Now, what is important to know is that it shouldn't be a source of stress come the application process, because students can make an open application if they like. They do not have to specify a college to apply to. So students have equal opportunity. There's no advantage to making either an open application or an application to a specific college. There's no disadvantage. So if students are just like, okay, I don't mind whichever college I will sort of end up in, I'll be happy, make an open application. It's absolutely fine. And to be honest with you, even if a student specifies a college, or puts it's a college preference, actually, they might not end up in that college anyway. They might end up in a different college altogether. And the chances are, and we'll talk about interviews later, but they'll be interviewed by a range of colleges anyway. Most students have a minimum of 2 interviews.
Yeah.
In essence, it's nothing to worry about. just enjoy it. If you're interested, have a look at the different colleges. What facilities do they offer? These sorts of practical matters are probably a bit more valid in terms of looking at differences between colleges, because teaching systems are exactly the same. But different colleges are in different locations around Oxford. So I'm in Lady Margaret Hall today. That's a little bit further out of the town centre than some of our other colleges. But it's right next to University Parks, which is a sort of wonderful sporting sort of park area. And it's a really lovely college. I've been wandering around it today. It's a really beautiful college. So it will have different facilities to other colleges. And as you alluded to earlier, not all courses are offered in all colleges. But what I will do is just pop a link into the chat, because it all might seem a bit confusing and a bit overwhelming. It shouldn't be, because it's simply a case that something to, as I mentioned, something to be enjoyed. But there's a really, really good, useful part of our website that goes into detail about the colleges. One final thing, is that sometimes there's a sort of a misconception that some colleges may give more offers to international students than others. It's absolute nonsense. That's not the case at all. It changes year to year, and our tutors are not looking at where students are coming from. They're looking at the students' academic interests, abilities, and potential.
Perfect. And so before we dive, because there's lots of topics that are touching to the actual application and selection process, but before we dive into that, what can students expect in terms of the rhythm? How many hours a week? How many weeks in a term? What kind of workload is it that's going to help us, for students to question themselves, am I a good fit for Oxford in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's really important, and an important question, actually, because Oxford, again, is a bit different in this regard. We have 3 8-week terms, so they're sort of very focused, and because of the nature of the Oxford learning environment, you have those 8 weeks. Each of those 8 weeks are incredibly intensive academic experience. So we have the 3 terms. They're called, rather, traditional sounding names. They're called Michaelmas, Hilary, and Trinity. And 8 weeks each of very, very intensive academic pursuit. So it will incorporate the tutorials, as we said, the lectures, the seminars, individual research, and it's not, it's a highly academic university. It's a university that is steeped in traditions of cutting edge research and world leading research, and it really is obviously an environment that students have to go in with their eyes open in terms of the academic expectations. I mean, it's not a place that you can be academically lazy. It's not. You can't coast through here. It just doesn't work. You have to be fully invested in the subject that you are studying. You have to be fully invested. You have to love studying. You have to love the subject that you are studying. Because look, I don't want to sort of speak too stereotypically about the English weather, but on a cold sort of February morning, you have to get up, go to a tutorial, and speak for 2 hours one-to-one or with one other student and the tutor about a very specific element of the course that you're studying. You have to love it to enjoy that, right? So you have to, it is an environment where the students who tend to be successful with their applications, but who thrive, have a deep, deep academic passion for the subject that they are pursuing, and are not afraid to go in very deeply in terms of very specific areas of their subject too.
And I can say after a few years in the industry and supporting students applying to Oxford, you do an amazing job at selecting students, and I think we can tell when a student has that passion and a curiosity that's just beyond average. And
that's right.
Yeah, and so it's the system you have in place, and we'll dive into that in a minute. I think it's great because it really lets the students that have that passion shine through that interview.
Absolutely.
So let's move into the application process, because that's always, and I always want to start with describing the university and what it means to study there, because too many students focus only on the prestige and how to get in. But Oxford is not for everyone, so it's good to take the time to set the scene before we we dive into admissions.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you doing so, because you're quite right. It isn't for everyone, and um, it it is important to know that as you're alluding to, that it's not just about the application side of things. It's not just about getting in. It's about thriving when you're here. It's about, is this the right sort of environment for you? Will you enjoy it? Will you enjoy your life on a daily basis if you are successful? And I think that it is really, and this is why I talk about course choice as well, because that's so important. I can't emphasize that enough, because it's our tutors, and I have to say this to you quite directly, our tutors couldn't care less whether you're interested in Oxford. They care about you're interested in the subject and you feel a deep passion for the subject. So the Oxford thing is almost irrelevant to the vast majority of our tutors.
So it's a perfect transition to the process here, where colleges select the students. So the degree is awarded by the university. The courses are set by the faculties that are across colleges. But the selection, each college will select their students. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that's correct. That's correct. Yes, and they select on in a very holistic way. You sort of touched upon this in terms of our very robust selection process, and it is very involved. But the whole point of it is, as you suggested, to allow students to shine in different ways, because there are different stages to the application process, and what our tutors are looking for are students who are going to be a good fit, who are going to thrive in the learning environment that we offer here and in that college. And so a lot of time is spent on selection. It's not just a case of looking at your personal statement, your grade, and saying yes or no. There's a whole lot more to it than that.
To restate the stage for that briefly, with UCAS, Oxford, you apply to Oxford through UCAS as one of the 5 choices. You can't apply to both Oxford and Cambridge. You have to choose. And then when you have Oxford or Cambridge in your list, your deadline is going to be mid-October, usually October 15th, instead of mid-January. You have the same elements that you would find in any UCAS application: personal statement, the UCAS form, the reference from your school, and the predicted grades. So in the way you look at this, is it the same as any other university? And then what else is there?
I mean, so it where to begin? But yes, no. Firstly, it's very important to, as you set the scene there, that just to reinforce really, the application via UCAS is exactly the same as it is for other institutions, other than the fact we have that earlier deadline of, as you say, usually 15th of October. But obviously you make 5 choices on your UCAS form, and you're making 4 other choices. Now, what we have in addition at Oxford is, for the vast majority of our courses, we also have there are admissions tests that students have to sit in their home countries, and also at that point, if students are then shortlisted after taking their admissions test, they are then invited to interview. So all students who are shortlisted are interviewed, and these all take place online. So again, you don't have to travel to Oxford to participate in the interviews. Now, some courses, there are 1 or 2 courses that might require students to also submit some written work. And if you're want to study fine art, you'll have to submit a portfolio. So there are some variations according to the specific degrees themselves. And in terms of processes, obviously, it's very important that students thoroughly interrogate the course pages relating to that degree, so they are fully aware of what's required of them in terms of the application. But you can broadly say you have the UCAS form, you have the admissions test, and then if you're shortlisted at that point, you have an interview. And I think it's very useful probably to go into each of these stages in a bit more detail. But just to go back to your original question, yes, we do look at the UCAS form in a similar way to other institutions. But of course, what is obvious from what I've just said is that that's not all we will use. That's not the only data point that we will use to make a decision on your application to study. I mean, there were 1 or 2 courses where there's a little bit more weighting because they don't have admissions tests. But the vast majority do. So our decisions are ultimately made based on looking at all the information we've gathered from you, whether it's written, whether it was admissions test, whether it's your interview performance, and then we make and the UCAS form, predicted grades, etc., and then we make a decision.
And so at Oxford, the test is always prior to potentially being invited for an interview. There's no test at interview that doesn't.
No, I mean not formal tests at interview. So the tests are taken in October, broadly speaking, so sort of late October, and then the all interviews take place in December, and they're concluded by Christmas. So we start in the first week of December, and it runs for the next 2 or 3 weeks up leading up to Christmas. And essentially, you will receive, if you are shortlisted for an interview, you will receive your decision, your notification of decision, pretty much by the time that most other universities expect you to make their application to them. So by mid-January, by January the 15th, you will know from us whether you've been successful or not.
And so for international students looking at these tests, 2 questions is, when do they have to register for these tests by? What's the deadline? And then where can they take the test? Do they take the test from home, or do they have to find an official test center near them?
You have to find an official test center. We run the vast majority of our tests, our tests are run through Pearson VUE, who have test centers globally. There's a whole network of test centers. The tests, every single test has very specific information about in terms of when they're actually taken. In terms of booking a test and registering for a test, all the information has actually just been published for this upcoming cycle on the website. I'll pop a link into the chat because, to be honest with you, there's more information on there than I can possibly go through in the short amount of time that we have. But I can give you an overview, and that is to say that students can register to take a test, but from tomorrow, actually, from the 18th of June until the 19th of September. So that's the window that we give for test registration. Now, I should say there's a difference between registering for a test and then booking a test.
Okay.
Because you firstly have to register to book, if you like. So you have to register. So you have to register with Pearson VUE.
Yeah.
All the information's on the link that I just popped in there, and then you can book the test place itself between 18th of August and the 26th of September. It sounds terribly complicated the way I've put it there, but the reality is it's actually a very straightforward process. You're registering for the platform, just putting in your details online to register with Pearson.
Same as UCAS. Right?
Same as UCAS.
You create your account, you can't submit right away, and then you have to wait till September. Yeah.
Then you wait for the booking system to open on August the 18th. And my advice, frankly, is to book sooner rather than later that test. So if I were a student thinking of applying to Oxford this year, I would be registering, over the next few weeks. And come 18th of August, I would be on that website booking my test spot as quickly as I can, because, and I say this because, especially if you live in either remote locations, test center places might be reasonably limited. So if, for example, that is the case, the sooner you do it, and if the better that is, because there are more places, but also if there are any issues and we need to try and help you find a test center that's closer to you, we can actually help you do that. But we can't help you do it if you wait until the 25th of September to tell us that, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's all about being organized and doing things, obviously, at the earliest possible opportunity. And for those students who also might have specific needs around sitting tests, of course, alerting us earlier to those and registering sooner rather than later, all the better, because we can then see what we can do to put in the sort of facilities that you might need in order to take that test.
If you have these tests, it means that they play a big role as one part of the application. How do students prepare for this kind of tests? Because there's many different tests. How should they go about it?
One of the great things I have to say about, I joined Oxford about 5 years ago, and I just I've been always so impressed by the transparency of the information that we have available to prospective students. So there are a huge number of resources that we offer students in terms of preparation. In our team, so I'm the head of the international recruitment team, and we have a program of events and online events where we help students prepare for admissions tests, essentially. So we start that series in early September. And we have a huge amount of practice papers, past papers on our web site as well. I pop the link into the chat here. And it is important that students prepare for these tests. So look over a few old papers, and then sit under time conditions, 1 or 2 past papers, just to familiarize yourselves with the form of the questions, the type of questions that are asked, and very importantly, the timing side of things, because obviously there are timed conditions. And, test performance, generally, good test performance correlates with success in terms of potentially gaining an offer. So really, I'm not suggesting students spend all summer going over, doing a past paper every day, doing 20 past papers. But what they certainly should do is familiarize themselves with it, take 1 or 2 of them in time conditions in order so there won't be any nasty surprises come test day, and that you know exactly what's going to be expected of you. Final point on this all one is that when students look at tests for the first time, they think, oh my goodness, that's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And they are. They're absolutely really difficult. That's the whole point of them. They're designed to stretch students as more than they've been stretched before. And so when you first look at those previous papers, and you think, oh, I couldn't possibly do that, don't be too alarmed by it. It will possibly feel like it's too much, but actually, the whole point of us publishing this information online is to allow students the opportunity to kind of familiarize themselves with these things. Maybe do a little extra reading. Okay, I didn't cover this in my French baccalaureate.
Exactly. I think that's the big challenge for some tests. It depends on some test students really feel it, depending on the curriculum where they came from, and maybe the A levels go in much more depth, and there's a bit of catching up to do.
There is catch up. I had conversations with 2 college student counsellors from French back schools last week, and they said exactly this. Our students really struggle with a gap in terms, and they were talking particularly around the maths test that we have.
The math test, yeah.
And so, they asked me, well, what can we do to support our students? And I said, well, the actual thing is, the earlier the better. Get students started on identifying that gap, and then students should talk to their tutors and talk to their teachers, their subject teachers. Okay, this is a concept that we haven't covered in the French baccalaureate. How can I find this information? How can I learn more about this particular area? I can't emphasize enough, it's incumbent on students to be proactive in these areas. It's not just about, everyone giving you this on a plate. Part of the challenge of studying at an institution like Oxford is the fact you're constantly faced with things that you don't know anything about. And, it's about then you discovering these areas, learning more about them, applying existing knowledge that you have to unfamiliar areas. So preparation is key here. And the sooner that students can start to look at these things and start maybe, okay, there's a bit of a gap in my knowledge here. What can I do? I can maybe do an online course that might help. I can do some reading. It's usually around reading, frankly. So, I think these sorts of approaches can be very, very helpful for students who maybe have not covered these sorts of areas, but all about preparation.
And so when we look at, so we have the test, we've talked about that, and the personal statement, now this new format with 3 questions. Is there any specific advice for students when they have Oxford in their list, when they go about writing this personal statement?
I think what you've got to do is understand that we're interested in your academic interests and passions. And we're no different to any other UK university, really, in that regard. We don't need to hear about your extracurricular activities, really. It is not something that's particularly important. And to us. It doesn't mean that you can't do them when you're here. There's loads of this kind of stuff to do, but it just doesn't form part of our selection. And I think one of the things is that you have to realize you're writing a statement, not just for Oxford, you're writing for the other 4 institutions you're applying to. And I think sometimes maybe students get a little bit hung up on the idea that, okay, I'm applying for Oxford or for Cambridge and I've got to really focus everything on that. Actually, you need to make sure that you're appealing to all those institutions that you're applying to. The personal statement is not, it's not going to be generally a make or break in terms of selection. It's important because it's our first meeting with you. Essentially, it's our first understanding and insight into what drives you academically, what you're interested in, why you're interested in it. And to be honest, the best personal statements I've read are the ones that go in deeply about a specific area of the subject and just maybe talks about a particular theory that's interested them or a particular book that they may have read and reflecting on that. Why is it interesting to them? What did they learn from it? And what would they like to learn more about? And why are they sort of wishing to pursue this particular area of study? So depth rather than breadth is, I guess, is where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, it's more about what they have to say about it than the number of summer courses they've done or listing things.
Like really, tutors couldn't care less about that. It's just not. They will never ask you about that in an interview if you're ever shortlisted. It's about the academic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is what you're applying to do. This is what you're applying to study. You're not applying to just hang around Oxford and enjoy yourself. You're applying to study and go deeply into your subject, the subject that you love. So, you know, if you love something in a subject, you read about it. You do, I do. We have our interest and we read, we consume, we watch, we listen specifically to our subject. So just try and talk about that in a statement, really. No university is going to be upset about you talking about that.
No, exactly. And I think that's where it's a good almost self-selection system, because when students are like, oh, I've never read anything about it, maybe Oxford is not.
Maybe this isn't for you. Well, also, maybe that subject's not for you. If you're struggling to write statements about that subject, so that does tell you something. So again, this is why starting to think about this earlier, you know, all the better. Start to make notes. You know, you read something, you say, "Oh, that's interesting. I'll make a note of that. I'll refer back to it." But the sooner you start to really start to sketch out what your statement might look like, and I think the better, because as you say, self-selection. If you're struggling with that, I would, if you love a subject. So I studied history. I would struggle. I struggled to fit in my, you know, it's only 500 or so words. The challenge was getting it down to that, you know. So that's the problem you should have, not actually finding the words and interesting things to say.
Let's move on to interviews. What to expect on an Oxford interview?
Well, look, first things first, I think they're really enjoyable. I mean, a lot of students, bizarrely, I know it sounds like that's a strange thing to say. Actually, you know, if you're shortlisted for interview, around 40% of our applicants are shortlisted for interview, so quite a high proportion, which means that we're carrying out over 20,000 interviews, because most students are interviewed more than once. So what to expect in the interview? Well, it's a mock tutorial. That's what the interviews are for. In a way, we should possibly call them that, because it's a slightly better reflection of the experience that you'll have within that setting. So they are designed to see how you perform in tutorial-like conditions, settings. So very often, tutors are not looking for right answers. They're not looking for correct answers, because they might not even exist. But what they're looking for students to do and demonstrate is an academic curiosity, an academic flexibility, critical thinking skills, and also the ability to listen, strange as it may sound. It's not just about students talking, it's about listening to what's being asked of you. It's listening to any interjections that the tutors may make, because they might be trying to get you to a certain point later on, because that's actually what tutorials are like. It's guided learning. So the tutorials, the interviews themselves are essentially that kind of type of environment. We don't expect students to dress smartly. You can dress, you know, it's all online. You are never going to be asked about why you chose a college or you didn't choose a college. Never be asked about that. You'll never be asked about your extracurricular activities. It's just not a thing. And so they are perhaps less formal than you might imagine. Our tutors are deeply passionate about their subject, and that's what they're trying to interrogate. Is this student somebody who's equally as interested in the subject as I? Do they have the potential to develop some really interesting ideas in this subject? Are they already thinking in a critical way about things? Are they able to reflect on, say for example, a question's asked by a tutor? Very often a student will give a response, and then the tutor will introduce some new information and essentially be asking the student to reflect on their original answer. Will you change it? Will you remain with the same sort of idea? Do students have the flexibility to be able to take in that new information and adapt their answer, even stick by their answer, but argue in a coherent but also convincing way as to why their original answer should remain? So these sorts of things are highly prized, I think, within that environment, because that's how tutorials work.
Exactly, and your professors are very used to it. And if you do 20,000, I didn't realize it was that big of a number, interviews every year, they have to make it enjoyable, because it would be such a hard process otherwise every year.
Exactly. Actually, it is enjoyable, and it's a wonderful thing. If you're shortlisted for interview at Oxford, regardless of whether you get in, that's a great experience, to be honest with you. And I know it sounds glib to say that, but it's not everybody that gets shortlisted. It's a really quite a feat in itself, quite an achievement. And so
It's already an achievement. Yeah,
it really is. It really is. And I think the worst thing, two things I would say. Okay, I have some pieces of advice around interviews, and again, I should emphasize that I do encourage you to come to the sessions that we run, because we go through a lot of the preparation needed for these kind of things. But 3 pieces of advice. Firstly, think out loud. Tutors can't possibly know how you think if you're just quiet and you're not saying anything. So think out loud. It's a discovery. You don't have right answers very often. It's about the journey to the potential answer. So thinking out loud is really important, because it gives the tutors an insight into, like, okay, where are they going with this? Can I help them a bit? Can I get them back on course if they're veering off course a bit? So thinking out loud firstly, listening very closely to what's being asked of you, and especially if a tutor is coming in at some point. And certainly do not pre-prepare big sort of sentences, or please do not pre-prepare any answers. You don't want to sound like a robot. You couldn't possibly know what's going to be asked of you, so the idea of preparing answers is a really bad idea. So don't go quiet. You can ask for a reflection time if you don't know the answer, of course. Can I have a moment to think about that? And then you can start using, like, well, if this scenario was in place, then you could say, so it's like, you don't need to be definite about answers very often. It's about that exploration.
So do students have to expect questions based on their personal statement? Do they have to expect new pieces that are presented to them, like text or images, or is it just a conversation? How is the conversation going to be guided?
It really depends on the subject, and it depends on the tutor. So even if the same subject, one tutor might have a very different approach in one college than another in a different one. So generally, there are sort of 3 different sort of approaches. I mean, I'm reducing it somewhat because, of course, it is a bit more varied than that. But some courses, some courses will have, say, a set text that you might respond to. That could even be shared with you in advance of the interview. Sometimes it's on the day of the interview. Sometimes it's in the interview, and then you respond to that. For sciences, there's often a problem posited, which you have to respond to and solve the problem, and to talk around the problem, that kind of thing. There can also be moral. Say if you're applying to study law, very often philosophy, there's very often questions around morals and explorations into that. So it really does vary, I have to say. And again, this is why it's really important to engage with the resources we offer and the preparation that we help international students with, but also start talking out loud about your subject. Now, if you're even remotely interested in applying to Oxford and the other place as well, you need to start being comfortable talking about your subject out loud. And I always advise students to do this at home with their parents, with their friends, with their pet cat. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't actually matter whether the other person you're talking to or the other animal you're talking to knows what you're on about. But getting familiar with talking out loud about your subject. And I think because they're all online, what's quite useful is just use Teams or Zoom to record yourself in that environment. Have some pre-prepared questions and record yourself doing it. Then you can look back and say, okay, I could have answered that better. Ask some of your teachers to prepare you some questions. Go on our website. There are plenty of interview questions on there. So, but what I would say is do not wait until you're shortlisted for interview to do your interview preparation, because you can sometimes only have 1 week notice, and that's not long enough.
All right, I'm looking at the time. We don't have to go to dive into what are the exact English language requirements or subject requirements or grades requirements, tuition fees. As you said earlier, everything will vary from course to course, and so everything will be indicated on the course page. You can find this kind of data point very clearly on each page.
Exactly that, Orban. So every course has specific requirements, and so in some cases subject-specific requirements. And you must obviously see that whether you have those, you're on course to meet them. If you don't have the requirements we lay down, you shouldn't apply. It's as simple as that. You have to have them, because you won't be shortlisted if you don't have them. You will be rejected. So it is very important that you meet those requirements. And we're very transparent about all the requirements we have. It's all very clearly placed on our website. And one thing, I think one area that's useful for you to have a look at is of course the international qualifications pages, and I'll just pop that into the chat along with some other links there. But that's also just for you to see, okay, if I'm taking French baccalaureate, what do I need specifically? Because we have the equivalencies there on our international qualifications pages.
So I'm just going to grab a few questions I saw on the chat that we haven't addressed yet. That's actually a funny question that I never even questioned myself. Why can't we apply to both Oxford and Cambridge? Where is that coming from?
It's a good question. It's simply it's a historical aspect where there's just an agreement between the two institutions that students can't apply to both. I mean, thinking about the possibility of them applying to both, it would be horrifically complicated to administer. So I suspect that's where the origins of it lay. But obviously there are many similarities between the two institutions, of course, and this is why I think students should always be course-led. And I think, regardless of Oxford and Cambridge, always be course-led. That's such an important thing.
So we have a question about tuition fees and potential scholarships. So right now there's two different. Either you are considered UK-based or Irish. Based, and then you have the kind of local domestic fees, and then if you're out of that area, even in the EU, you are considered international fee payer. So we mostly work with international students that would be considered international fee payers. So are there any options at the undergraduate level for students to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are, but they are few. So international undergraduate students are not particularly well served by scholarships. It has to be said. I've just added a link there, which it's to the homepage of our international pages for students. But within that, you will see information about fees and funding. There are some scholarships available each year, but the vast majority of scholarships for international students actually go to students studying at the master's or PhD levels. So students generally can't, and the few that we have are incredibly competitive. But you can see the ones that we have available, and there are obviously, we always encourage students to look for scholarships from their home countries as well. Many countries around the world, through government schemes or different sponsorship bodies, where it can be private companies, it can be NGOs, it can be all sorts of different organizations. There's quite a lot of provision in many countries around the world for students to be able to study internationally. And of course, governments have lists and things. Obviously, Oxford is very high up in terms of provision for those types of scholarships.
Yeah, like I've seen the Oxford Ellison Scholarship, which is that a research institute? Yeah, affiliated to.
Well, it's not really affiliated directly. It's more a case that Ellison scholarships are available for students to study at Oxford. So we don't have an official affiliation. It's very much led by Ellison in that regard, the Ellison Foundation. But it's for innovation. And the first cohort of students were awarded scholarships last year, and there were 10 of them. So, it is very much worth looking at in terms of if students are in need of funding and scholarship, but again, highly competitive scholarships.
Exactly, you have to be both accepted at Oxford, which is already a challenge in itself, and then on top.
You also have to go through a fairly rigorous selection process by Ellison. They have their own sort of selection process, and indeed it is fairly rigorous. So again, it's something which you also have to factor in. Okay, so it's not just applying to the UK universities, and also them having to go through this process. But they're very comprehensive scholarships, and of course they have conditions attached to them. So it's all very, very important that students also have a thoroughly sort of appraised of that. They know what they're sort of looking at in that regard.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just checking the chat, see if there are any more questions. If you have any questions, this is the time.
One thing I would suggest for students who are interested in Oxford is to go to the international pages and sign up for our mailing list, where we will essentially provide information about our webinar program. And students who involve themselves with it, they're more successful in terms of their applications. It's as simple as that, because they are armed with more information and their preparation is better as a result. So it's very much worth doing. And if you're serious about applying to Oxford, then I'll thoroughly encourage you to get involved in that way.
All right, perfect. Well, I think that'll be the last few words on this podcast. Thank you so much for your time, James. It was very, very clear, very helpful to pass that message to our entire community. Very, very helpful.
Thank you very much for inviting me today, Owen. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you, James. And to everyone who followed live, thank you very much for joining. And we'll see you, I guess, next academic year for the new season of the Anywhere Uni live podcast. Thank you, and have a nice day or a nice evening, everyone.